My wife Kate always reckons I like getting my head on camera. So the next person you're going to hear from today is me. Look, I do feel very privileged for not only had the opportunity to interview so many wonderful Tasmanian veterans for this series, but also for the many of my own experiences during my time with the Australian Army. To everyone watching this series and has supported us through this process, thank you. One of the most unusual things around family military history wasn't widely spoken about. I did know that that my great-great-uncle crawled across to German lines at night on a raid and fell in the trench on top of the Germans and got whacked out over the head by a shovel. So I knew that story because my grandfather told me that and showed the letter from his great-uncle. Then there was an artillery barrage and he managed to escape. The other part though was that on the 8th of March 1944, my great-uncle, also on my mother's side, was out over the English Channel, flew out to Calais. He was attached to the Royal Air Force and he went out over Calais on a photographic run. And so instead of guns, they have cameras, they had super fast Spitfires, and they flew very high. And he would have been going out there to see if the German army was building up at Calais as part of the Allies' deception plan. And so as he came back, it was a really rough day and everyone said, oh, he was shot down. He wasn't. What he did was, his engine went into his Spitfire and he was obviously flying into the wind because you could glide across the English Channel. And he radioed that he was going to have to bail out. And apparently there was some form of triangulation where you hit button A, and then when you're ready to go, you hit button B, and it gives them, your side, a perception of where you are. Mm-hmm. He hit button A, and he went. He didn't hit button B. And so there's no triangulation of where he was, and they went out to look for him, but it was just wild, rough weather. And anyway, Alan passed away. And one day I was sitting there and I was looking at a book. I was 10 years old, and I remember this very clearly, and there was an aircraft crashing into the water, into the English Channel. And Mum came into the room, and I looked at her and I said, Mum, I wonder if that's Uncle Alan's aircraft. And I just remember she froze. And I don't know why I'd know that was about Alan. I didn't know anything about him. And she froze and she said, we don't talk about that, and walked out of the room. And it wasn't until 2014 when we went to the Australian War Memorial and Alan's daughter, my second cousin, came with us. And that was the first time she'd ever seen her father's name on the wall there. And she said, why is it so shiny compared to the rest of the names? I said, that's because I come here often and, rub the names, When you lost someone in a war like that, families, the ripple effect went on for 2-3 generations. Women generally remarried pretty quickly, and then it became, there were stepfathers and all that sort of thing, and it just didn't work. There was a lot of problems, and of course that filtered down through the ages. Because I was so ill, I used to read a lot. And I used to read absolutely everything I could get my hands on. And so I was always reading about military history, and bear in mind was still in the Vietnam era then, and learning about different armies, learning about different equipment, all the way back to the Roman era. And I had a stack of magazines called knowledge magazines that my father collected. And when I'd get to the bottom of that pile, I'd start reading them again and again and again. And my parents thought they'd make us smarter by getting the Encyclopedia Britannicas, the big leather-bound ones that are just, fantastic. And, they'd always think I was studying, and I was never studying. I was just reading encyclopedias just to learn things, and I'd learn that, then I'd go and get that one, and, and there'd be books spread out everywhere, and they just thought I was studying. Come here, Wonders. Come here. So, what I'm going to do, Brett, is I'm just going to introduce you to Maple. And Maple is Kate's little dog. It's a dachshund. It's the worst breed on the planet. But as you can see, they sort of get you into your heart. And I think, like many people, dogs become our lives. If you look around the walls here, despite having 3 kids and 2 grandkids, there are no pictures of them, but there are lots of pictures of dogs and paintings of dogs and all that. So dogs are very, very important. When I get stressed, my golden retriever comes in and just relaxes me. And this one here, she's only young, but she actually thinks she's a golden retriever. So you see a lot of those humorous things, like where she's trying to swim or chase them down through the dog park. But dogs are really, really an advantage to people that are suffering mental stress or simply companionship. So, all up, Brett, including the shorter tasks, I've had over 10 deployments. Iraq was the hardest because our country didn't know what the hell they were doing. Every time I heard the words niche capability, I just shuddered because it meant we couldn't do anything else. We couldn't even get ourselves out. One of the things I learnt, one day I was out at Al Udeid, which was the Air Force base in Qatar, and a big jet flew in, a big passenger jet, like we would say a 777 now. And it pulled up, and the stairs went up, and General Tommy Franks, head of the US push, came down, and he got in a Black Hawk helicopter and flew away. Next day, a Learjet comes in, and it taxis up, stops, 4 black SUVs pull up, and the British head of operations gets out of it and drives off. An hour later, our boss turned up driving himself. And that said to me exactly where we fitted into all that. We were making an effort, but we were like the 3-year-old that's trying to be something to 2 teenage brothers. And yeah, you can go and do that. We would do a convoy into town, into Baghdad. And I remember coming back one day, and we had the 4 commando gun cars at the front and the back, covering bridges as we came up to them, and then covering the bridges as we went past. The Americans didn't do that. And after we came back, the convoy behind us got hit. And they'd been lying up on top of the bridge, but because the commandos with the gun cars were covering the bridge, so you basically like that, then like that, yeah, with 50 calibre machine guns, they didn't put their head over. The convoy behind us was American, and they got hit and people were killed. And so that was one of the fortunes of war, where things can change very, very quickly.
Maple.
Come on, Maple.
Come on.
I just don't like dachshunds. Hey, look there. Look there. Look there. Look famous again, I'll be on telly. Go hello. Say hello. Yeah. Good girl. Leaving defence is also a big step, especially as a medical discharge, because you go from, in my case, from being a senior officer one day to picking up dog shit the next day, because of our golden retrievers. And so it's a big step. But I became involved with the Totally and Permanently Incapacitated Federation, Tasmania, TPI Federation, and the media team at Duff TV, to give them a hand in going around the state and recording veteran stories. And of course, with my love of military history, my big history of deployments and part-time reserve service and full-time service, it was something that I saw that would help me through transition. And the pressure was always on me for me to tell my story, but I was sort of hoping I could duck, dive and weave and get away with it. But obviously, as we hear today, mate, I didn't succeed with that.
Yeah. So these stories, once they're archived, what's the aim for them, and what are we looking at them? Where are they going to be kept and used?
So these will be used, depending on future funding. They'll certainly be used by Department of Veterans Affairs. They will certainly be taken and stored into the Australian War Memorial. So Martin and I have been in discussion with them, with a friend of mine up there that looks after the electronic media. And of course, we will also ensure that they're captured and given to the Military Museum here. And if we ever have the stadium built, there's hope that we'll have a state war museum. We're the only state without one. Yep. To capture that history, and they will go there as well.
Fantastic. So that's where we are now. Let's go back to how it all began. So tell me about your early childhood, where you grew up, your family.
So I grew up at Kingston, obviously the Antarctic Division there, on a 290 acre farm that belonged to my grandparents, and it was there that as I grew up there, military service was always something you did. It wasn't something that was forced upon anyone. We just did it. And
who lived with you, Phil? How was the family breakup?
So lived down there with my parents and my three sisters. Yep. We were in one house. My grandparents were in another house, and my great-grandparents, who built after the 67 bushfires, lived about 300 metres away. Yep.
And what pecking order are you with your sisters?
I was the second born, so I've got an older sister and two young ones, and it was a very unusual family for that time, because we actually had 5 generations of women, so predominantly women. So up until I was 18, 19, my great aunts were alive. Mm-hmm. Auntie Marge went on Roald Amundsen's ship after he beat Robert Falcon Scott to the South Pole. She went on a Japanese warship in World War One. She remembers the end of World War One. She saw World War Two and the arrival of the Americans here, and then of course she saw space flight. She saw computers and mobile phones. So she went from a young girl who got excited when Hobart got gas lights, then electricity, and then flushing toilets, running water, and all that. So she saw a big evolution of our Hobart society.
It's that 100 years, sort of 1900s to 2000s, where those people that were able to do that saw a lot of change. And as a child, how was that spoken about? Obviously, the eras that we grew up, if we're talking late 60s, I'm guessing for you. I'm a little bit younger, so I'm sort of more early 70s. But if we go into those periods, what were you allowed to hear and talk about as a kid?
I think a lot of the conversations, you never spoke about divorce.
Yeah.
never spoke about that, and you never spoke about death. And so if you look at that in the context of kids were seen and not heard, and so you tend to get shunted out of the way, and look, that's just the way society was, and it's things were never spoken about. For example, it was only 18 months ago that I found my father had a younger brother who died. So it was about the fact that knew that Mum had a younger sister who died in infancy, but never knew that Dad did. So I rang him and I just said, "Hey, I have a question for you. Who was Ian?" And he didn't miss a beat. He said, "That was my younger brother who died." And I said, "Why do you none of you ever talk about him?" And he said, "Because he's gone." And so that was, I think, a way that everyone managed. There was more acceptance. Death was a part of the circle of life, and then you moved on. And being on the farm, farm life's hard. Always was back then. Growing up during the Vietnam era, and my father was in Officer Cadet Training Unit, course number 1, so in 1968, where he graduated as an officer. And he went on to serve in the reserves for about 13 to 15 years.
So before you go too much with your father, so family life with Mum and Dad, what was Dad doing as you were growing up?
So my father, as he was growing up, was linked in with Purity supermarkets. Right. And so he and the Pyke's family, Michael Kent, David Ambrose, all came together to bring develop the Purity supermarket chain. Okay,
still in Kingston?
Yes. So Dad opened up what was called the food barn. Cheap prices. People would go around and write the price of the product on their, on their produce, etc. So not marking it means you had less staff. You just cut boxes open, put them on the shelf, and all that. So it was a unique concept for its time, and people would pick up texters at there and go through. And generally, the people at the checkout knew if you'd lowered the price or not. But the thing was, though, I remember it being a shop that just had black texter marks everywhere because people just wrote all over the place.
So were you close with your dad as you grew
up? Look, not particularly, because I was always quite ill. And Dad was a sportsman, runner, all that sort of thing. He'd do Point to Pinnacle, but he'd do it up the zigzag track. And
what about your sisters, Phil? Were they sporty as well?
Look, my older sister played softball, the others not really. We lived on the farm.
Did they have any of the asthmas or the other things that you've seemed to have grabbed hold of?
So my sisters generally were quite well growing up. I seemed to inherit it at all. And of course, so that was something, particularly battling with asthma, and I used to lie there at night and often think that I'd never see the morning because asthma was so bad. There was no Ventolin. There were no preventatives like Becotide or any of those.
What was your treatment?
Treatment was either when I got really sick, the doctor would rush out and pump me full of adrenaline. And so if I had a bronchial condition, I was only ever going to go downhill.
So brown paper bags that you see in the movies?
Breathing
in and out? Never anything like that? No, steam and that sort of routine?
So at times, steam help open up the bronchial tracts in the lungs. But generally, as a rule, it was really, really hard. And over time, Mum and Dad spent a lot of money trying to find out what the hell was causing it. It was cats, it was grasses, and it was dust. And so, but the thing was, even though it became cats, we had 4 of them. And they kept replacing them, so I'm not sure whether. And my parents wanted to, sort of do away with me.
So your dad, you said before that your father was starting to get involved with cadets or something similar. So what's your memories of that? What got him involved in that?
So that was the Vietnam era, and of course it's national service and all that sort of thing. And so I think Dad joined because he wanted to have, like, if he got picked up in the ballot, he'd be a private soldier. So he wanted to go in and, you know, try the officer path. So the officer cadets were what we call staff cadets today, and they so he was the student of merit for the first training course here in.
And it was in Tassie, or did he have to go to Canberra like they do now, or where was it held?
No, so everything was centralised in the state. So the states would run as their own entities.
Yep.
You had a commanding officer that was usually a brigadier or a senior colonel, and then all the units here were subordinate under that. Okay. And which unfortunately we don't anymore. So one unit here will belong to a bigger formation on the mainland. That one will be, and yet you can't bring them together to operate. So it's become self-defeating, especially when the reserves are really disjointed like that.
So what sort of age were you around then? You would have been a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old?
Yes.
That sort of time.
Yeah.
So were you able to see what your dad was doing? Were you well enough to go and see when he was working, or when there were parades on, or did that start giving you that feeling that I'd like to do something like this?
So we always had, family events. I think I was about 8 years old when I had my first beer at one of those family events. God forbid any unit that happened now. And I thought the beer was the most revolting thing I'd ever drunk. But I felt sort of cool because I was around all these army people. And so there was always the army fair, which was held every year. And so you'd go up there, and because I was so ill, I used to read a lot, and I used to read absolutely everything I could get my hands on. And so I was always reading about military history, and bear in mind was still in the Vietnam era then, and learning about different armies, learning about different equipment, all the way back to the Roman era. And I had a stack of magazines called knowledge magazines that my father collected. And when I'd get to the bottom of that pile, I'd start reading them again and again and again. And my parents thought they'd make us smarter by getting the Encyclopedia Britannicas, the big leather-bound ones that are just, fantastic. And, they'd always think I was studying, and I was never studying. I was just reading encyclopedias just to learn things, and I'd learn that, then I'd go and get that one, and and there'd be books spread out everywhere, and they just thought I was studying, and I wasn't.
So when you've come into your high school ages and starting to sort of feel like work is starting to come a little bit closer, how am I going to prepare myself? You've been a big reader, explains a lot about what you're going to talk about in the future with your media side of things and doing that sort of stuff. But what pushed you towards military? Did you physically grew out of the problem, or were there medications that came in to help?
So what we did in 1982, I thought, look, I want to go and join the Army Reserve. I was growing up, I wanted some tax-free money. I wanted to go and do something that was a little bit different. And so to me, it just was a normal, natural step. Because the thing that I've got to raise is that Anglesey Barracks, my ancestors first arrived there in 1840, and from then every generation had gone through the barracks. And so that was, we've had that connection. That includes my kids, and with Air Force cadets, and both of them joined up to Navy through Anglesey Barracks. So we've had a footprint there since that time, which is heading towards 200 years. And so it's really great to be able to put, when the British regiments left and there was the militia here, the reserve of the day, our family was involved in that. And so we've always had that presence on the barracks. So I think that was also part of the natural flow as well. It's, to say, well, it's in our DNA. Now, I didn't join because my father did. I joined because I just wanted to have a bit of fun and do something different. And being in the Army Reserve back then was quite highly regarded, you know, so people would go, wow, you're in the reserve, oh, you know. And of course we were very autonomous as well. So, you know, today it's over-governed, it's, you know, high levels of bureaucracy, and, you know, it can, you almost need a risk assessment to do your bootlaces up nowadays. And I think for that they've lost a lot of what made it function at the local level.
I think the other thing that we've changed in society now, because there are so many options, and we believe that we don't need to work and wait, is that we can follow our footsteps. If your dad was a farmer, you a lot of the times became a farmer. If your dad was military, you became military, because this was the lifestyle that we knew that it worked and it provided well for the family. When you first joined, what corps were you a part of and what was your role?
Okay, so the first corps was infantry. And so we joined up, you know, in the cost-cutting days in that post-Vietnam era. You know, we had light infantry, so we were independent rifle companies. Okay. So that is basically just train with what you got, we're not giving you anything else. And I remember joining and we were starting to learn the Bren guns, and then suddenly the Bren guns were gone. And we had just all we had left was the GPMG M60, which is, you know, the Pig's just a great weapon, because also in that era, something came out in the movies that was so inspirational to us, and that was Rambo. You know, and with the M60, and you know, it's called the Pig, and oddly enough, F-111s were called the Pigs as well, and but it was a pig of a weapon, but it was fantastic. Except if you had to carry it on patrol, then it was horrible.
So what did normal life look for you? And well, firstly, when you join the Army Reserve now, you go through a basic training. You're sent off to Kapooka still. I think they've cut it down, but it used to be 6 weeks or similar for reserve. Then you come back to your unit, maybe do some core training. 1 night a week parading, and then potentially once a month weekends. What was the commitment to you guys back then? Was it similar?
So recruit training was just 2 weeks at Brighton. So we had the Brighton Army Camp there, which is you know, still there in some form today. And then so you do 2 weeks there, learn to shoot the weapon, learn to march, have a graduation parade, and go back to your unit. And then the unit will say, look, out of that we got, you know, you're sent to a platoon, and then that platoon will be training in something. And so infantry was great, you know, back in those days. You know, we travelled everywhere in the back of army trucks, would go right up the other end of the state, lying in the back in, you know, our army trousers, boots, but in singlets, you know, sitting there with goffers with, you know, cans of cordial and all that. We'd stop somewhere and, you know, get you know, refueled with the roadside dim sims and takeaways, and it was just, we did things back then that very much you wouldn't do now. You would not go that far in an army truck.
Was it still 1 night a week?
So the commitment there back then was 1 night a week, 1 weekend a month, and 2 weeks a year. Yep. So it was very basic, but but post-Vietnam, you know, we were never going to go anywhere again. And it took, you know, up until 1989 to be able to get, you know, people deployed to Namibia, and all through the 90s. Then we had Cambodia, Rwanda, you know, post the first Iraq War.
Yep. So we'll get into them really quickly, but in between this era, you've joined late 80s. We're talking almost 10 years before, like you talk about, things are starting to move out with the military. What was your normal life looking like? What were you doing employment-wise?
So I followed my dad into supermarkets, working with, then moved into working with major companies that supplied into supermarkets. So, you know, working across different chains, you know, Coles, Woolworths, all the independents, and all that sort of thing. Look, it was good, it was repetitive, and it was something that I really didn't want to keep on doing. And I almost thought I would go to the Navy and do that sort of thing. But I realised then, sort of later in the 80s, early 90s, that I didn't have a good enough standard of education. And so I had to go and find out what the hell could I do. And to study nowadays is so easy because you just get online and you study. You buy a course, you get free courses, that sort of thing. Well, I went to Montage University when it literally was distance education. Everything arrived in the mail, everything got sent in the mail, and you just had to work through everything. The only reach out that you had was via a telephone.
So you finished school, did you do up to year 12?
I'd like to say I did up to year 12. I did attend up to year 12, but once again, you know, there are elements there of wanting, my father wanting me to do subjects like economics and all that, which I particularly found very, very boring, and I would prefer to sit in English and study authors and poetry and all that, so that whole English literature range. And you know, that was more where I wanted to be. And if at that stage, if you'd asked me what I wanted to do, I wanted to go to the Australian Film and Radio and Television School to study screenwriting.
So you did do English and that through that, but you were encouraged obviously by your father because of his business side to probably come down the other path because that's what he's doing, that's what's successful. Yep. So what stopped you going there? When you said about I'm not educated enough, you're a massive reader, you were from a young kid. So was it because of your results at school?
My results at school, I actually have a complete inability to do mathematics. And so, you know, measuring, designing something, building something, I can't comprehend it. And I don't know why, and it could be that part separation of the hemispheres of the brain where, you know, one's creative, artistic, etc. The other one...
They say one maths and one English, don't they?
Yep.
On either side, very rarely both. Yep.
And so I then, you know, so my focus was always on reading and writing. And even in grade 6, I was writing what I'd perceive as novels. And so a wild, vivid imagination. And, you know, and I'm brought up with the Biggles books by Captain W.E. Johns about the World War I, you know, the World War I fighter pilot and his mates, and then the other one where, you know, he went through World War II into chasing the Nazis after that.
So we're not here for the rest of the 3 months because we could keep talking, but it amazes me at the moment that you've got to that age, you've been working in the industry where your dad is, you've wanted to educate yourself more, which is what you've been doing with yourself since you were bedridden almost, but because I know of you, you've then joined the police department. How the hell did that happen?
So I stayed in the reserves for 9-10 years, and then I'd always wanted to do something that was different. I wanted to I hate things that are repetitive. Every day is the same. I didn't want to do an office job. You know, you walk into a supermarket, this is what happens every day. You know, those sort of repetitive actions drive me mad. And so what I wanted to do was completely change my focus and have a life where things were exciting, things were challenging. You know, the other thing I did in 1983, I joined the Tasmanian Fire Service as a volunteer.
I was going to have another question, so well done.
And so as I approached...
So in 83?
83.
Okay. Yep.
And so in 1983, I joined the Tasmanian Fire Service as well. So I was learning about firefighting. I was learning about, you know, I had an interest in that. I had an interest in fire behaviour. I always joke, Brett, about the fact that in 1967, I was here in Hobart. In 2003, when the major fires hit Canberra, I was in Canberra. And in 2009, when the major fires hit Victoria, I was in Victoria, but I have an alibi for the rest of those other
ones. A lot of volunteers have been looked at. So we're not here specifically to talk about the police department or the fireys as much, but we will overlap with them because they do overlap with your life and your career. So you've joined the police department in 1993. How long did you serve?
So I served just shy of 15 years, and I think I was 5 months off 15 years, which sounds odd, but it came to a realisation for a whole range of things that I couldn't keep going.
15 years is a long time in any service, as we know. While you were doing police work, just very quickly, what areas did you work in Tas Police?
Look, I always did general duties, and I was really always happy doing general duties. I liked the variety. I hated getting shoplifters.
Which is a 24-hour rotational shift for people that don't know what general duties policing is, yeah?
Yeah, so with general duties, yes, those 24-hour rotational shifts, but it was a week of night shift, a week of day shift, and a week of afternoon shift. And that became quite a challenge.
So after that?
So then I stayed there and did bits and pieces, and I actually did some courses in fire investigation. And
through Tas Police or through the fiery connection?
With the fire service, and so I had that background in understanding that, and so it was. Fire behaviour is fascinating, and the way that it moves, and shows patterns, etc. And I went all the way through that to actually learn wildfire investigation. And if you think of wildfires where thousands of acres are burnt, and you can bring it back to an area 5 metres by 5 metres, that is more of a jigsaw than in a structure. I was fortunate enough with that training and experience to be able to go in and around the time at Port Arthur and actually take over as a forensics fire investigator, so working with the fire service in a whole range of areas, including writing the manual of fire investigation for Tasmania Police and the fire service.
So in the time of, and you've brought it up as Port Arthur, in the 1996, obviously worst tragedy in Australian history, and we talk about that side of things. Your role was what, and give us a breakdown of what your involvement was.
So as a result of the incident at Port Arthur, there were a number of things that occurred outside the actual terrible tragedy itself. And that was the fact that we suddenly realised the Tasmania Police media office of one person wasn't adequate to manage it. And so after that week of being at the scene, being at Seascape, helping the fire investigators there, and that week of all the way of looking after him in hospital and the like before he got transferred to Risdon Prison, I got a phone call on the following Monday from Commissioner Richard McCready, and he said, "You are to attend the media office, and you are to stay there until we've resolved the incident completely." And so I walked across, and there was a man there, a public servant called Jeff Easton, and I said to Jeff, "What's this all about?" And he said, "This is crisis and issues management." And I said, "You got any idea how we do it?" And he went, "No," and we just hang on for the ride. And so that's learning on that J curve about crisis and issues management was actually part of what led me back into defence in 2001. And my view was that I was too old to run around the bush back in infantry, man-packed mortars and heavy machine guns, all that, which was all a lot of fun. But it was time to, I would have to go back in as an officer. I'd have to go back in based on my university qualifications and my experience.
Tell me about your university qualifications. Did you have that already before Port Arthur?
I detected very early on that policing in the future would require a higher standard of education. And so I wanted to take on a university degree. I got accepted into Montage University in the early 90s, I began to study a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities and Social Sciences. So basically history, politics, etc., stuff that I loved. And so by 98, I had completed it. And it was then I thought that I'd like to try the public affairs role at Anglesey Barracks, which I knew was vacant. So I made application to go back into Army. The problem was their criteria was we only accept A-grade journalists, and I wasn't a journalist. I'd never been a journalist. I was basically what people would term today as a strategic communications manager. Back then, no one knew what that actually meant. So in a world where we were in, we were starting to go into Timor, people were starting to learn what strategic communication was. And that was probably the saving grace, because people just, thought it was all about open days, stickers on kids, nice fluff pieces in the local media, and that somehow supports recruiting. Very much 1980s perspective. And so I went back in, and while I'd taken, it took me up nearly 2 years to go back in, so across 2000, 2001. And I did my officer selection board and was accepted on the 6th of November 2001. And obviously, the 11th of September 2001, the world changed. So what happened there was I went through 2000, so came back in, got issued clothing, did it my knife, fork and spoon course, which is for those.
Where did you go and do that, Phil?
I went and did that at RAF Base Point Cook, and so the home of Air Force, as we were reminded of, and we and basically it's a shortened course for people that are already specialised, so people that are specialists like doctors.
So just to explain in layman terms, you've stopped reserves. For how long were you out? They call it Circat 5, Circat 3, something like that these days, is that right?
Yeah. So, okay, I'll wind
just
it.
to basic it up so people understand how it works.
So I left the reserves in 1991 when I basically made application for police.
Okay.
So in making that, in being successful to Tasmania Police, and then obviously going back and learning about this crisis and issues management, dealing with daily media inquiries, everything now that Army, Navy, Air Force all focus on, that's what police were doing back in the 90s. And so that was the catalyst for me having an interest to go back in. So I had a gap of, almost a decade. And then I, once selected, taken back to Montage, went to Montage University on the mainland to do my basic courses.
Yep. So to be accepted as an officer, they accepted obviously your tertiary training to be able to come in at that. When you left 10 years earlier, I'm presuming you were corporals or that sort of rank? Yeah. So that then allows you to go through as the officer because of your university training? Yeah. And how long was the course for the officer?
So the course for the reservist was only 2 weeks back then. So the 2 weeks training and then a number of follow-up. But the interesting thing was, this is a specialist knife, fork and spoon course, because you have people that are lawyers, that are doctors, that are chaplains, ministers in their church, psychologists, etc. So that it's a big pool of people, and some have military experience prior, a lot don't, and so it's basically, this is how you iron your uniform, this is what your ranks are, this is how you march, this is how you do all these sort of elements. And it really was quite interesting. For me, it was going back to basics.
And no doubt assisting with some others that had never seen that before. At least you had some background. I
do recall our first day going to the range, a lawyer standing there with his webbing all in pieces going, how do I put that together? And it took a psychologist to show him.
Quite interesting. So you've gone through that. That's posted you. Did you get the job at Anglesey Barracks you were talking about?
So after I went through, I was attached into Anglesey Barracks, but the world was fast changing. So I was owned by Canberra under the Office of Vice Chief of Defence, where all public affairs under Army were owned. And so that was one of the things that was very different. So I was loaned to Anglesey Barracks. I looked after Army, Navy, Air Force, including the cadets, and there are a number of cadet issues to be managed. It allowed me to really get into the crisis and issues management from a defence perspective. You know, when we find that we've got leaking fuel tanks and that have been leaking for years, and we're putting contaminants underneath a primary school, those are the sort of things that we have to work on managing. And at times, defence want to be quiet. Well, in the police world, we're always out there, so it's a big contrast.
Now, sorry, this is prior to 9/11 in September?
No, after.
This is after?
So 2002, did all my courses, and...
So what rank were you when you came out?
So I was a captain.
Yep, okay.
So left as a corporal, and so that was out of the 12th 40th Battalion. So I was a private and an NCO in 40th Independent Rifle Company and the 12th 40th Battalion. Came out as a captain, and from then on I could do basically the same courses as my reserve counterparts from the Arms Corps. And what I found though, because we were owned by Canberra, was that there were opportunities there. And I remember being rung up in early December 2002 asking if I'd like to go to the Middle East at the end of January 2003 on the off chance that Australia becomes part of the invasion force for Iraq. I was policing then. I took leave from police and went. We ended up going. We left in late January, and I spent all that time in the Middle East, and then of course from March onwards went into Iraq.
So how long were you actually over there for?
So moving around the Middle East and into Iraq from basically February right through to June, and then came home in June, and which was very, very different.
So when you went over under which banner and who were you attached to?
So we're attached to the Australian National Headquarters under Brigadier Maury McNahon, who I've seen many times since, and caught up with Maury. And we were based in Camp Al Salaya in Qatar, and then there's the Air Force Base nearby at Al Udeid, and that's where, for the first time since Vietnam, we sent jets overseas. So we were based there. Navy were conducting the same operation they had since the end of the first Iraq War in the 90s, and that was transiting across the Straits of Hormuz into the Northern Arabian Gulf, trying to get oil and dates that were being smuggled out of Iraq as contraband. So it was a pretty intense time, and it was a very active headquarters, because at the same time Afghanistan was rising as well, and we had people in Afghanistan.
So I've got numerous photos. I don't know all of them and what they adjust to, but I'm going to just throw a few at you and just get you to explain to me what these are and whether they will trigger some memories. And
look, I wanted to show you this one, and this one's quite unique. That's an RBS-70 missile system on HMAS Canimbla with a young sailor there. Behind that is a Royal Navy Sea King lifting off, and that Royal Navy Sea King is from the Royal Naval Air Station Coldrose in England, and it was 2 days after this photograph was taken. Two of them were flying up and down the fleet, and you can see that big dish piece there on the side. That is a detector for incoming missiles, etc. And quite tragically, this aircraft and another one ended up crashing and killing everybody on both aircraft, and they went down just off just off where Canimbla was in the Northern Arabian Gulf.
And they were shot down?
No, they crashed.
They crashed.
Yeah, so two of these Sea Kings crashed into each other. I guess, with a bit of black humour and irony that, they were out there detecting incoming missiles, but they didn't see each other. And they're all Royal Navy members, except for one who was US Navy and a direct descendant of one of the US presidents. He died as well. This photograph, taken by my photographer, my Air Force photographer, Bill Guthrie, this was sent to the unit after the crash, and the families of the deceased really appreciated that potentially what was the last photograph of their loved ones on the aircraft.
So tell me about how you get there. How does Phil Pyke actually get over to the Middle East?
So it's a matter of where I'm working in defence, in that strategic communication space. Everyone knows now about information operations. Everyone understands how powerful it is. And back then we were just learning, we were learning around children overboard. We were learning around Afghanistan. We'd learnt from Timor in '99, and Timor was still going when we were heading to the Middle East. So we knew what we had to get as that product, and it wasn't about the fluff pieces. Even though they're good for reassuring families, etc., it's about getting the hard edge stuff that our troops were doing. Now, in an invasion phase, we did not have people forward, but there were opportunities where myself and my team flew into Baghdad with the 4 Commando, which is now 2nd Commando, 4 Commando regiment, and we would to drop off medical supplies, and it was a hot landing, hot unload. We had civilian media with us, and we had these big burly commandos. So a hot unload is where an aircraft lands and it's under full power. Everyone's ready to take off, and we were, taking the stuff out very quickly, being unloaded by the Americans, and then everyone was back in and gone very quickly.
Yep, gunners on standby, engines running.
And it wasn't until we got back, we had Ninox attached to our cameras in a very primitive way, that you could actually see all the explosions in the background as the fighting in Baghdad was still going.
So when you first were told you're off, talk me through what that did in you. There's no doubt excitement that you're off to something else, but you've got a family. Tell me about what that meant and how you address that, and then how that side of things works.
Look, now Kate and I really understand about pre-deployment nerves and how bad it can be. We didn't know if we were going to get paid. We didn't know how we were going to get paid. The system was pretty bad, and getting leave without pay, so managing one employer while trying to stand up for another employer was really, really hard.
So in those days you had to apply for defence leave from the police department to be able, did they have to grant it to you, or is it like now it's legislated? Was it legislated back then as well? They had to release you?
No, so police didn't have to release me, and we'd already gone through that with some of the other police that who actually resigned to go to East Timor. And so that was always one of the issues because in the Second World War, people in those sort of industries couldn't go. Yeah. So we really were stuck on how we would actually work this. And then so I got leave without pay, off we went, still didn't know how we were going to get paid, and a lot of us never got paid for 6 to 8 weeks because the system was so poor. And we had families screaming at us, where's the money, where's the money? We could only see one person in the headquarters who were going, oh, I don't know, and it was really, really difficult to provide family certainty, and it really was quite an extra stressor that nobody else should have.
So in that era, what was the communication like? Let's go back to how often could you call Kate and the kids? What did you need over there to be able to do that? How long did you boat over or did you fly?
We flew to Western Australia, and Australia had a complete incapacity to do any heavy airlifts. We actually got on board a Russian IL-76 and flew from Perth to Diego Garcia. So the island's out in the middle of the Indian Oceans. And we stayed there overnight while the aircraft, the company running the aircraft out of Lithuania, had got diplomatic approvals to land each time in Kuwait and in Qatar. So we ended up going up, flying into the Middle East, landing in Kuwait. We unloaded people there, and then we flew down to Qatar. And we were landing at their airport, weapons and everything there. We were in plain clothes and trying to get everything off that airport into trucks and buses and all that, into a camp, and then finding out where the hell we were bunking down. It just was a very, very difficult process.
At that time you were a captain, or have you got no further promotions? Just for the lay person who doesn't understand, and that's me, I haven't been in that situation, surely you're a captain, everybody else carries everything for you and does all that when you get off a plane in a hot zone?
When you're working in a small team, everybody does everything. And so when you're moving part of a unit, as we were, then it becomes quite problematic. And the very fact that Australia was so small in this that we couldn't even do our own heavy lifting was immensely difficult. But anyway, we set up at Asalaya, built our teams, and then we basically, where we're going to go, what are we going to cover? And I got assigned at the Royal Australian Navy. I went to sea on HMAS Canimbla, HMAS Darwin and HMAS Anzac, none of which exist now in the Royal Australian Navy. They've all been decommissioned. And we went for a week and we stayed for 6. And we were there during the opening phase of the conflict in Iraq. Lots of missiles, B-52s were bombing on the Alfour Peninsula, which was shaking Canimbla, and she's out at sea. Putting teams in onto the up the Kwara-Abdullah waterway.
And again, for people that don't understand the Navy side of things, Canimbla was a supply vessel? Or no, please.
Yeah. So HMAS Canimbla was with the supply vessel, and then HMAS Anzac was Anzac class frigate, and HMAS Darwin was one of the older vessels, which was also
it was a frigate. It was a DDG, I believe. Yep. Okay. Sorry, just for that side of things. So, 6 weeks, you're away, war zone. How many times were you able to call Kate?
So you had to book on the ship. So communications is obviously very different in the modern era. Nowadays you can do FaceTime, you can do all that sort of thing. Exactly. Back then it was emails and it was periodic phone calls. If we were at Asalaya or on one of the bases, you could simply walk up to a phone, hit 0 and dial the number.
And that's because it's a safe zone?
That's because
that technology was set up.
So we could ring home because that's how the technology was set up in the Australian zone.
So out of that 6 weeks, how many times would you have been able to do that?
Look, just for peace of mind for Kate, I used to try and ring in the morning, their time, try and ring in the evening, our time. And so just basically to bring her up to speed, couldn't talk about what was going on or anything like that, but to really just keep her settled, because, you know, this is not a wife of a regular army person. This is actually a wife of a reservist who was helping with open days and stickers on kids. So Kate had Abby and my daughter Em there periodically. My daughter was 11 and Kate's daughter was 8. And so young kids, and you know, they were worried because of what was being seen on TV as the Americans went through. So we ended up in southern Iraq with the clearance divers and did a lot of work there. You know, there were some hairy moments where we were shelled, constantly being shot at, and one stage we thought we were going to get hit by a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, who just turned out to be some very bad drivers under UNICEF, but they nearly got killed. And so we were sitting there waiting to open fire on them, and they managed to skid just over the stop line and got out with their passports. And so very, very scary. People were around us were injured. There were people that were killed. There's the landing craft were up in the Reeds area in the marshes, and someone opened fire on one of the landing craft medium, the LCM-8s as they're called, and killed a heap of killed the British people there, and they believe it was a case of mistaken identity. So there were big mines there. There was a lot going on in that space, and of course there was out in the town of Qasr, there was a very shocked community. But one thing I do remember is that we were driving down through the town in four-wheel drives, just standard 110 four-wheel drives, soft tops, and and as we're driving along, the Iraqis are all standing there watching all the invasion forces come across the border, the British, the Americans, all through. And we were driving the other way, and I remember this Iraqi man, and he's standing there and he looks at us as we go past. And then all of a sudden he goes, "Hello, Australia! Hello, Australia!" And you know, everyone says, like, how the hell did he know? How did he know? And but good day, mate. How are you?
So there was no insignia for him to pick up off?
No, and he just knew. He must have known. And so, yeah. So look, all that was very, very interesting in its time. And then the way I got out of southern Iraq, I handed my weapon to Navy. My 2 team members had gone south, back to Kanimla, which then sailed south, so I'd got left behind. I caught a bus. And I caught a bus out of a war zone, back across the border to Kuwait, to Kuwait City, and it dropped me off after 6 weeks there, another few weeks in Qasr, dirty, smelly. I had 2 uniforms, not much else because we only went for a week, outstayed our welcome. They dropped me off at the Hilton Hotel.
Why? Why did you catch a bus?
Because I got a phone call and they said, this bus is coming up, it's got these people on board, you are to get on that bus. Yep. And so I just handed my gear back to Navy because I didn't want to be taking their weapons south because we'd never get back to them. And I had faith in the bus driver, and they dropped me off there, and so I've come out of a war zone straight to the Hilton Hotel, and I can tell you it's complete mind-blowing. It is completely mind-blowing.
Like jumping off the moon, I imagine.
It would be. It is. It's absolutely crazy. So we're there. Went back to Qatar, and then. Did Anzac Day in Qatar, so a big coalition thing, and the British and the Australians obviously commemorate Anzac Day. The Americans don't, but they were there, and then we took off back into Baghdad, and so we're part of all those initial forces in Baghdad, and we ended up trying to set up right on the edge of the big palace complex. And I remember being on picket one night with a captain from 4 Commando, and we were sitting there on 2 chairs outside a building looking down a road. And I said to him, "Oh, so the Americans are down that road?" And he said, "No." I said, "So who's down that road?" He said, "The bad guys." And I went, "And who's between the bad guys and us?" He said, "No one." I went, "I don't like this anymore."
So they'd taken the palace?
So the palace had been taken.
Yep.
And
so did you get to go through the palace, Phil?
Saddam Hussein had multiple palaces. They all had to be kept running because nobody knew when he would turn up. So the palace complex was a number of lakes, and you had houses where the senior members would live, because they'd be near Saddam, and so they all had houses there, the senior members of the Ba'ath Party. And so, but the palace itself was quite unique, with big spiralling staircases, lots of marble. Our headquarters was in the ballroom, big, with marble floors, marble walls, ceilings, and it really was quite unique. But I can tell you that the French furniture, the Louis XV furniture, wasn't real, and the gold taps weren't real, but there was marble everywhere, and it really was quite unique. It really was. And what we'd do for entertainment is that we would sit there at night and we'd watch war movies. And so We Were Soldiers, Black Hawk Down, and all those ones of that era, we would watch, and then you go outside and watch the battles. And it was very, very hot, 43 degrees, very humid, and it just saps the energy out of you. And one of the things that I remember, Mike, there was, Brett was waking up one night as the palace complex was being attacked by insurgents, and all I could hear was the Americans on their 50 caliber machine gun just firing, just firing. Now, having been in the war zone for a few months, you might expect that we would all go to stand to, ready for whatever may come. I just sat up and I just screamed out the window. There was no glass in the window, telling him to shut the F up. We were trying to sleep. And then I tried to go back to sleep. And when people hear that story, they go, "But you're getting invaded." I said, "Well, it was a long way for them to swim across there. It was very close distance-wise, but we had our own security people who would soon tell us to get out, up and move if we had to. But just to be there while we're getting attacked, and all I could do was just tell them to shut up, interrupting my sleep."
We're talking about getting used to an environment, aren't we? Unfortunately, we almost become subdued to certain things, I'm glad you brought that bit up, because as you were talking about the palace and your role when you were in country, or whatever else we're going to say, and I use that terminology because of my father's background with Vietnam, and they used that a lot, that some people may not believe that your role was in that front line because that wasn't officially it, but that's how close you were to contacts. You were working alongside, and you were in a zone which, as you state, yes, there might be a safe distance, but a gun and any artillery, etc., can fire quite a distance as well. So, yeah. Tell me what led after that, and also if there's any pictures that I've got here that then jump in between, so please stop me and grab them.
So, what occurred? We were moving around constantly. And as you headed out to the airport, Saddam International Airport, which quickly got renamed to Baghdad International Airport, we would actually, you'd never do this today, but we would go out by ourselves in our own vehicle, which was a 110 soft top Land Rover.
Without escorts?
Without escorts. And we would drive down Ambush Alley out to the the Air Force people, the Royal Australian Air Force people, at the airport that was setting up.
So when you're going out, Phil, just explain who's going out with you. What are your numbers?
So we went out with 3, and basically myself, my sergeant, and a corporal. Yeah. So they had pistols, and I had the 5.56 Steyr rifle. So we would go down, and we'd always been warned that the 2 battalions of Iraqi fighters that the Americans had raised, one they'd been training in Hungary, the other one they sort of gathered people up as they came through and raised them into a battalion. They had very distinct sandy and chocolate, dark brown uniforms, and they had FIF on the 3 Iraqi fighters. And the problem was, once they got back into country, they all vanished. They took their weapons and disappeared and started extracting revenge upon people that they had perceived had done them wrong. And we were always told, if you see them anywhere, be prepared to fight. And we were going out to the airport one day, and we came to a known roadblock, and looked up, and there were 2 there, 2 of them there. And we couldn't see anyone else around. And we can't go back because the Americans would just open up because we're going down the wrong way. So we had to make some quick decisions. Well, my decision was not to sit behind the sergeant in the left-hand seat, because that's where they think the driver is. And I said, you know, guys, we're going to have to be prepared to fight through here. We can only go forward. And they were standing there. One had his weapon on the concrete barrier. The other one had it down by his side, AK-47s. And we're just moving forward, and they're waving us up.
Many other people in the convoy waiting or going through the checkpoint?
Just us. Yep. And, you know, they were waving like this, and we'd slowed right down, and they were getting a bit agitated, you know, come forward.
What distance are you from when you're talking now?
200. Yeah. 200 metres out. So we were 200 metres out, and we were rolling forward. Yeah. And I said, just keep your eye out, because we were going to have to gun it and fight through. But that was the orders. If you see these people, they're going to hold you up, they're going to shoot you, they're going to take you.
As far as you know, they've got AK-47s. What would you say an accurate distance with an AK-47 is?
300.
So you're definitely within their zone.
And so we just kept on rolling forward, and, you know, but their posture didn't change. Still had his weapon there, the other blokes do it. And I thought, this is weird, you know, because don't seem to be ready to receive us in a hostile way.
Hold there again. I'm very much trying to think of people that don't understand some of the things. How did you see who they were? What have you got in the bus as far as binos or other things?
No, we just came up the straight. Yeah. Very distinctive uniforms.
Yep. So that was from that distance you could still see what they were wearing pretty much to identify. Yep.
So we observed them and as free Iraqi fighters because of their distinct uniform that they were wearing. And so, you know, it immediately, you know, this is a day after we'd been briefed on these people, and there they are in front. So as we're rolling forward, their posture didn't change. They didn't become aggressive or anything like that. We were ready to fight through. We were ready to shoot them. And as we got within 50 metres, my sergeant said, look out to the left. And just under the tree were 2 Americans. And I went, well, these 2 Iraqi fighters must be the only 2 left out of 2 entire battalions that wanted to end up and keep that, you know, they're doing the good cause. Yep. And we went through, you know, had to talk to them, and one of them spoke very good English. The Americans came up to see what we were doing, and then away we went to the airport. You know, we would do a convoy into town, into Baghdad, and I remember coming back one day, and we had the 4 commando gun cars at the front and the back, covering bridges as we came up to them, and then covering the bridges as we went past. The Americans didn't do that, and after we came back, the convoy behind us got hit. And they'd been lying up on top of the bridge, but because the commandos with the gun cars were covering the bridge, so you basically like that, then like that, with 50 calibre machine guns. They didn't put their head over. The convoy behind us was American, and they got hit and people were killed. And so that was one of the fortunes of war, where things can change very, very quickly. You were talking about earlier about, you know, what is the front line? In asymmetric warfare, there's no front line. The person you just talked to could turn around and be that enemy. And we learnt this from the Vietnam era. And one of the things that we ended up doing was, my sergeant was 6 Battalion Infantry. My corporal was 3 Battalion Infantry. And of course, I had my own infantry background as well. And so we looked at helping the infantry soldiers who made up Secdet 1, you know, they sent a platoon over. That is 3 sections of about 10 or so people, plus some add-ons. They had to look after 3 different sites, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 6 months. So nobody obviously thought about redundancies and illnesses and all that.
What's the site look like, Phil? Explain that to me.
Well, the site could be the Australian Embassy in Alcarada, which is a single-storey building. But the problem is, it's got a multi-storey building right beside it.
And they're in charge of security.
And they are in charge of security. This is Secdet 1, so the very first team to go over. And so everyone pitched in to help them because they were looking after another site over in the Green Zone, and another site somewhere else.
How far away from each other?
Kilometres.
Right.
Kilometres.
Okay.
So no one was going to get any support.
Yep.
And so I went and saw the lieutenant, and I said, look, while we're here, working out of here, why don't you stand some of your people down and we'll take over? And he was quite happy with that, and because it was a very small patrol footprint, but we ended up taking fire quite often. Bullets crack thumping over our heads, and the Americans would always drive down the road, and there'd be gun battles about 400 or 500 metres down the road with RPGs going off. We held a pretty tight perimeter until one night we got this big stand to, enemy on the wire, and so there was concertina barbed wire around, and someone had been seen trying to crawl through it, and everyone is stand to until they found that it was a local drunk. He'd just fallen into the wire.
He didn't get shot, I hope.
He didn't get shot. So the 2nd Battalion guys, helped him on his way, but we were in the centre of town. It was really amazing because you'd have, one of the things the Iraqis have from the British time there, was tea and biscuits. Mm-hmm. And we would have morning tea with the neighbours over the fence, and we'd be sitting there with all our weapons out, having tea and biscuits, and it was just so surreal because over in the next few streets you can hear gunshots going off and all that. And so what happened there was I met an Iraqi father, and his nephew had a job that in the multi-storey building there were a number of cars, old vintage cars, and he had to look after those. So when the war came, Karim, Hamid, took his entire family down under that, and they stayed there until the first people they saw were the commandos who came to secure the embassy next door. And it was surreal for that point that they came up and they asked who owned the cars. They thought it was Saddam's sons, and which obviously it wasn't. And anyway, it was an unfinished hotel that was being built, and Saddam's sons had turned up and told the owner he couldn't finish it because he could look down on Saddam in one of the palaces. So that's one of the things there that were really quite amazing. But Karim, I became good friends with him. We got his wife to hospital on the 22nd of May 2003 to have a little baby boy called Hassan. That's the day before my birthday, and Hassan today is studying to be a dentist in Baghdad. He's doing really well. His other brother, Mustafa is studying in Europe and is having a great life, and Karim is as a Shiite Muslim who'd been tortured under Saddam's regime. He and his family have had a better life, and in a very small way, around all the misinformation of why we went to Iraq, that was it.
That's answered the question that I really wanted to sort of say what was out of it. Yeah, so come in and explain.
So this is probably the iconic photo. That this is in the Australian War Memorial, and you know, we always used to say when we went out on operations never to end up on the wall, and that's the roll of honour of the Australian War Memorial. Whereas this is very different, and this is taken by the Australian War Memorial photographer that came with us, David Parker, and it's really quite iconic because it's a mixture of weapons there, and then there's cameras and all that sort of thing. So, you know, it demonstrates what we do, where we go, and we get involved in everything. You know, we are the combat camera teams, and you know, we go where we can. We tell the stories of what we can, and you know, before it all gets censored by Canberra. So right at the back, that good-looking bloke with hair's me. Have Sergeant Mark Dowling here, and Mark's been on several operations with me, and Corporal Darren Hilda here. This is, you know, symbolic of sort of the work that they do. These guys had experience in Timor, so for me as a reservist from Tassie, it was really, really good. But you know, we had things like we had journalists kidnapped on us in southern Iraq, you know, and we had a whole range of adventures, I guess, that were really, really.
Just tell me about
amazing.
the uniform quickly. First thing I noticed, and I don't know if this is a guarantee, but I know it was something in Vietnam that they wouldn't do when they were operating. I don't see rank. Is that still the case whenever you're in the zone?
No, rank was worn on the shoulders.
Was it? Okay. Because I know there was always the thing that if they could see an officer, they'd try to hit an officer first. That's obviously wasn't so much the case. Yeah.
Yeah. So when people are really operational, they now have small patches here. So they don't wear it down the front, but they have small patches there that have two, you know, things that people can recognise. So it really was, you know, the other desert cams, the ones before that were almost purple. We were known as the bruised bananas, but they worked really well in the desert, as in people just lie down, don't move, and very, very hard to see, where the Americans had very standard camouflage uniforms. As we wound down, you know, my team and a number of others, you know, it was time for us to go home. And so I came home and back to Tasmania. I had a few days in Canberra. Kate came up and we went to Sydney and just sort of hung out there. And then we came back to Hobart. Very quickly, you know, I'd gone from 54 degrees to -8 in Canberra. I'd been put into the officers' mess where there was no heating because they were about to pull it down. I was the only one there. There was no cars. There was nothing I could do, and my unit was getting set to go to the Solomon Islands, and so that became a very difficult sort of element.
Were you replaced when you came out?
So there was another team going in. You know, our time was done. It was time to rotate out, but basically when I got back to Hobart, contract's done, thank you very much, and that was it. And I was very much treated like the national servicemen were in Vietnam.
About to ask, so you haven't mentioned debriefing or anything yet?
No, there wasn't no debriefing. I was the reservist that came home, and then that was it. And there was nothing.
The full-timers that were with you, did they receive anything, do you know?
There was no support for any of us. But the other guys at least went back to the unit, and then that unit, you know, they were doing their day-to-day job.
Yeah. In the full-time service back then, did they have those facilities, I guess, for those full-timers?
I'll tell you about that in a sec. So came home, And I reckon a year later, it was actually during one of the Tasmania Police counter-terrorism exercises, and I'm just working in the media, and I thought I was going mad. I just couldn't sleep. I was just all over the place with my thinking and my processes, and so I walked up to Anglesey Barracks to see a psychologist, and was basically told that I was a reservist and they couldn't deal with me. So they sent me down to the Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service, but that was the only sort of help that we had, and it was difficult because they didn't know how to deal with reservists. Everything was set up for the regular people. And
what were the percentage of reservists that would have gone over, Phil?
Overall, right through all the deployments, 10% of the deployed force came from the reserves.
That's 1 in 10 people, still enough that need looking after, isn't it?
Well, you have doctors that take leave and head over, and in a war zone they're getting skills and training that they would never get otherwise around gunshot wounds and blast wounds, etc. So, come here, Wonders. Come here. So, what I'm going to do, Brett, is I'm just going to introduce you to Maple, and Maple is Kate's little dog. It's a dachshund. It's the worst breed on the planet. But as you can see, they sort of get you into your heart. And I think, like many people, dogs become our lives. If you look around the walls here, despite having 3 kids and 2 grandkids, there are no pictures of them, but there are lots of pictures of dogs and paintings of dogs and all that. So dogs are very, very important. When I get stressed, my golden retriever comes in and just relaxes me. And this one here, she's only young, but she actually thinks she's a golden retriever. So you see a lot of those humorous things, like where she's trying to swim or chase them down through the dog park. But dogs are really, really an advantage to people that are suffering mental stress or simply companionship. So, all up, Brett, including the shorter tasks, I've had over 10 deployments. Iraq was the hardest because our country didn't know what the hell they were doing. Every time I heard the words niche capability, I just shuddered because it meant we couldn't do anything else. We couldn't even get ourselves out. One of the things I learnt, one day I was out at Al Udeid, which was the Air Force base in Qatar, and a big jet flew in, a big passenger jet, like we would say a 777 now. And it pulled up, and the stairs went up, and General Tommy Franks, head of the US push, came down, and he got in a Black Hawk helicopter and flew away. Next day, a Lear jet comes in, and it taxis up, stops, 4 black SUVs pull up, and the British head of operations gets out of it and drives off. An hour later, our boss turned up driving himself. And that said to me exactly where we fitted into all that. We were making an effort, but we were like the 3-year-old that's trying to be something to 2 teenage brothers. And yeah, you can go and do that.
But you were hearing it differently through the media circles? They was being promoted differently back here to Australia to people or to other military?
So we had quite a lot of media up there. And there were 2 sorts of media. There were embedded media, where media were put into, just going to sleep, where media were put into units and stayed with those units for the duration. And there were what they termed unilateral media, where the media would basically not be attached to anyone. All Australian media were unilateral. And so when we set up in Bazaar, we actually set up a place of safety for Australian media. We didn't have to, but we did that. And they had a satellite dish that came from Reuters that Channel 7 and Channel 9 had funded. And the British that controlled that area, 4-2 Commando, knew if they got rid of that dish, unilateral media, including those that were using it on the road, that dish would have to leave the area. So they were trying to target the transmission dish. Anyway, one evening in Qazar, I saw these armoured British four-wheel drives pull in and drive straight to where the journalists were. They didn't share our facilities, they had their own, but they were in a place of safety. And I could hear the journalists arguing with these people. And I walked over there, and there was a British Lieutenant Colonel and a British Major, and 2 cars full of, young soldiers, squaddies, and the Lieutenant Colonel was basically saying that if he caught the Australian media out there on the road, he would throw them back across the border. And a journalist, Jeff Parry from Channel 7, was arguing with him. I listened for a while and I walked around the corner, and I decided to be the belligerent Australian. So I walked around the corner, I had my t-shirt on, my trousers, my boots, and I had my hands in my pocket, completely, against their protocols. And I said, "You can't do that, sir," in my best strine. And he, "What?" I said, "You can't touch them. You can't do anything to these people." And he demanded to know who I was, and I sort of half straightened up, took one hand out of my pocket, told him who I was. And he said, "I catch these people out there, Captain, I'm going to throw them across the border." So I suddenly straightened up, pulled out my notebook, and I said, "Okay, sir, I need your full name and your unit." And he couldn't believe that a captain was asking this. And I looked at the Major and I said, "I want yours too." And they said, "Why?" I said, "Because this bunch here have already run Canberra and complained to the Minister about something that didn't suit them. But when they complain about this, I want to know that the Minister knows your name and your name, sir, and then he passes on to your Minister, and then the arse kicking comes all the way down. You can't touch these people." And I said, "Oh, by the way, I know who made the complaint against me." And I said, "We'll have that discussion later." And the British couldn't believe it, could not believe it. And in the end, they kept on making, we have to know this, we have to move them. "Give me your name and your unit, sir, now." And of course they jumped in their four-wheel drives. The young private soldiers, the young squaddies, thought it was hilarious that their bosses were getting treated this way by the Australians. And as they drove off, all these thumbs came out the window. And we never saw it again, but it was really, it was really quite a dynamic sort of environment, because we had to look after our people. It got really bad when a group from another media unit came in, and they were very ill, and the US gunnery sergeant, who was just crazy, and he'd been assigned to the clearance divers there, the EOD people, and he wasn't fighting a war, so he was vicious, and he actually walked out and got them to move out at gunpoint. We couldn't touch them, we couldn't do anything because they weren't Australian. And I was told by the senior Navy officer not to interfere.
So when you set up, I guess, your camps and everything else, were there zones which were classified as Australian zones, international, or was it just you're there all together and there was a shared zone?
Look, it's a wharf shed.
Yeah.
Australians there, Poms there, Americans up the other end. Yeah. And, it was very, very close-knit, because we'd share rations and all that sort of stuff. And, Americans had stuff that we'd like, we had stuff they liked. We'd always shove the Vegemite into them.
Military police all from both sides, did you have those resources?
Military police were in Baghdad, right. And so they were with us. there, but I think the most I had to do with military police was more in East Timor in 2008.
So where do you want to go to now, Phil, with your
Well,
deployments?
let's go to Timor.
Right.
And so in Timor in 2008, it was a recovery phase for me. I hadn't been well, and Defence actually stepped up. My people in Defence stepped up and supported me. And so after I had a complete breakdown in 2006, and my role in police was, community policing, policing schools program. I was never that person that was out there in traffic or in CIB.
Something that you chose to do, Phil, because you could, when you look back now or subconsciously, you were staying away from more of the frontline work?
Well, it was
because of what you'd seen?
So I knew I was losing it when we used to go out and do random breath testing, and one night a drunk old Vietnam veteran threatened to punch me, and his capability of doing that was zero. But I deliberately provoked him to try and have a swing at me, and it was actually a young constable, also a former ADF member, that actually diffused the whole lot, and I just realised then I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't do it anymore.
So did the police offer assistance to you back then, Phil?
There was no assistance. There was no assistance, and it was a defence thing, With defence, my people, worked to get me back on my feet. They sent me off to Malaysia on an exercise, Suman Protector, which is with the British, Singaporeans, Malaysians, New Zealanders, and Australians. And so we went over there to do that job, and I was assessed. One of my mates assessed me, and I said, make it hard. And anyway, I got through that with flying colours. Then they asked me if I wanted to go to Timor.
When you said he was assessed and he was a mate, I'm presuming he was a professional.
Yeah, so when I was assessed, he had criteria to assess me on how well the team was working, and he was there not to oversee me, but to set up, for success. What did I need and all that? And look, I was fine there. I was fine, and we moved through Malaysia and had some really Singapore, etc., and had some really good, strong, positive outcomes. So that set me up for going to Timor in 2008. But Timor was a different can of worms then from 1999, and there were a lot of tensions that were rising, and there was a rebel army led by Alfredo Renado that were getting very threatening towards the Australians and New Zealanders. And so that tensions kept on rising. Until such time that on the 11th of February, the president of Timor was shot, along with Alfredo Renado and one of his second in command, and it really was the start of the status siege. Timor for me changed everything again because of the shooting of the president. We had a brand new government, the Rudd government in Australia, and it just reminded me, to be quite blunt, how useless our central government, our federal government are at managing crisis on the ground. And so all I had to measure this against was, how would I do this in police? If we were doing a major incident, counter-terrorism, you would have people out there every hour, on the hour. I got to do that with the senior commander once before the request came from Canberra to close it all down. And when I spoke later to Lieutenant General David Hurley, I told him how wrong they were. And a major telling a Lieutenant General how wrong they were doesn't always end up well, but however, I stuck to the ground that I'm the bloody expert across multiple scenarios, and Canberra was completely useless because the government wanted all the glory, and we're doing this and this, and what I'm doing now, Brett, I'm studying information operations, cognitive warfare, and that still stands out as an example of not what to do, because it created such an information vacuum that that Fretlin, the opposition party, flew to Darwin, and Mario Alcatere informed President Jose Ramos Horta that the Australians had left him there to die. And so that did not work well for us. And even though it was ADF people that donated blood to save President Horta's life. And so that always rankled me, that government step in because they think there's something in it for them, and politicians and people at the top have no idea how to manage things effectively and efficiently. And that continues to this day.
There's a lot to be said for small terms and other bits and pieces of government.
So,
let me just draw attention to these two photos. I know this is a special person to you, so please explain.
This here is a Timor shot of my mate Mike Harris. And Mike was a very unique guy. I met him in defence, and he and his family lived over here for quite a while. He was here with Southern Cross, and then worked at the ABC. Went out and did some private work, and but always remained in the reserves or full time. And very sadly for Mike, he
these pictures are both in Timor film?
No, this one's in the Middle East. Yeah. This is actually taken out in the west, out in Jordan, and you can see that there's some very special vehicles there. You know, so that will say where he is. And so Mike was a thorough gentleman, committed to working with young people to get them, you know, through the ranks and make sure that all the skills required were provided. And just a really top bloke overall. And I got to know his family really well and all that. Mike went to Afghanistan around the 2011-2012 mark, at the Middle East, Afghanistan, and he ended up coming home partway to bury his father, who died of bowel cancer. He went back, came out to bury his, on the way home, to bury his grandfather who died, decided to go and have a bowel check, and he was riddled with bowel cancer. Mike fought for 6 years, and while I was in the middle, while I was in the up with Navy in on exercise Indo-Pacific Endeavour 2017, Mike was fighting every day, and once again Defence looked after me because I was ordered when I got home to go to Canberra, and it was purely because my colonel wanted me to have time with Mike. And then Mike passed away in late January 2018, and he was 6 weeks off 50. So Mike didn't die in war, but he died because of war. He had multiple deployments, lots of challenges, and he gave everything. But the wonderful thing about what the current Chief of Defence did, Admiral David Johnson, was he kept Mike as a serving member right to the end. Mike died as a serving member, and that meant that his family got a much, much higher level of compensation, of support, etc., that would not have occurred otherwise. And it was just one of those things. And it was the dignity of being able to go as a serving member. It was a full military funeral. You know, I was one of the, I gave the eulogy. You know, lots of funny stories, of course, but because I was so ill as well, I couldn't accept the fact that he had gone. I was angry about it. I was angry for years that he'd gone, and that it shouldn't have been like that. And you know, and consequently, it was when I became medically discharged, I still carried that anger, and it's taken me, you know, another 2 years to get on top of this, and actually become more relaxed about talking about things. And of course, these little things, and the big ones that, as you know, the golden retrievers, really are our companion dogs. You know, they're not assistance dogs, they don't need to be, but they're our companion dogs, and they're always with us, always around us. And it's really fantastic that we have, be able to connect with dogs like this.
And Phil, we could sit here and talk about your career, because we've barely touched on it, what you're still doing now within the different services. You're still attached to the fireys?
I still, the fire service is going through major reform. It's got a long way to go, and so I'm part of the volunteer association, our union, so to speak, and I don't believe that we've ever been, volunteers have never been equal partners in their own organisation, and I'd like to see the way forward. For example, as a Lieutenant Colonel, I have nothing there, no recognition in the fire service, so it gives me nothing. And it doesn't matter, even someone that is a senior firefighter in national parks can't even get their qualifications recognised in the inside the fire service. So we've got a lot of problems there. They're working through them, but my aim now is to ensure that we, as volunteers, are protected industrially, because we're not protected under the Industrial Commission, and that we're properly looked after.
I think it's a real credit to yourself, and you need to take this on board because you're not a great one for it, is you've achieved a lot from where you've come from. You've continued to fight the battle even though of your illness, that you call it. We all have our demons and our battles, and you've been able to push through that and hopefully be able to help others to understand that it is a process. You've seen the good and the bad of all the forces as far as what they can offer and what they can't offer. And again, we've got people like you fighting for the people out there. So you'll hear it all the time. A lot of people sit there and say, but thank you for your service. I think it's a credit. But like you said, there are certain things out there that we can't control, and we learn to grab onto things that will help us. And I think that leads us perfectly into seeing these beautiful pooches of ours and highlighting how important they are, and that people need to trust in other methods. There's not just a medication, it's not just other things, but being able to have this sort of thing is pretty special. So thank you, Phil. Thank you for the opportunity. And again, I reckon we could write 3 or 4 more books on what you have done as well. Go see the pooches.
Maple?
Come on, Maple.
Come on.
I just don't like dash hounds. Hey, you like girl? Oh, look there. Look there. Oh, Baba girl, look at that. Is that my girl? Hey? You're going to be famous again? I'm going to tell you. Go hello. Say hello. Hey? Good girl.